Take a look at this, and this, and this. I could show you so many clips like this, and every single one of them has the same thing in common. The bass are traveling along an edge, and here's the key, at a very specific depth. So when we know this, why do we so often, and I do this all the time, constantly put ourselves in a position to have the least amount of success? To massively improve our bass fishing, we need to always think about this paralleling the correct depth. I think we'd all agree that our chances of catching bass go up exponentially when our lures are in the right zone or depth for the longest amount of time. But instead of using this information to our benefit, bass traveling with edges and fishing parallel to them, so often we fish perpendicular to what we are targeting, and our lures are at that key zone or right depth for an extremely short period of time. It can be a shallow shoreline edge or a deep one, a shallow weed edge or a deep one. It doesn't matter. One thing I've seen so many times is that when we find a depth that bass are using, there are many fish or groups of fish using that same depth or that portion of the water column. And there could be a couple of key depths on any given day. Let's say there's bass holding out in that 2 to 4 foot range, and then you find another key depth at, let's say, 12 to 15. But we rarely see bass all over the water column like you would, let's say, panfish. Groups of bass tend to spread out horizontally, whereas you find schools of panfish stacked vertically, potentially covering a huge portion of the water column. Now, even when you have an amazing piece of cover or structure that is holding a ton of bass, they most often are relating to a certain depth on that cover or structure on a particular day, like this old boat slip dumped on its side. By far and away, the majority of the bass were holding right at the top edge of this sunken slip. To catch fish here, you had to be at that depth. Now, I'm not saying that fishing perpendicular to the edge you are focusing on is bad, but once you determine the right depth where you are getting bites and hopefully catching some fish, think about how you can position yourself or reposition yourself to work that edge parallel to keep that lure in the right zone for a much, much longer length of time. It will translate to way more fish being caught, and this definitely can be more challenging when fishing from the shore. But bank anglers can think about what edges are they finding out there. Is there a clump of weeds? How can I cast to work the longest weed edge? Or is there a bend in the lake or pond where you are fishing where you can reposition yourself and make a long cast parallel to the shoreline, hopefully finding that key depth? I parallel shorelines whenever possible. I also parallel channel breaks or creek ledges whenever possible. It puts the odds so much more in our favor. Well, next time you are out, always be thinking about, once I get that right depth dialed in, how can I keep my lure in that zone the longest I can and not flash through it or move through it too quickly by being positioned the wrong way. It is a game changer. And hey, if you want to watch a video on a chatterbait or bladed jig retrieves, 2 of them that are really key for stepping up your chatterbait fishing, go ahead and check this one out right here. And make sure that you go out and encourage someone today. You never know how you might just change their life. For the Bass Fishing Life, I'm your host, Steve Rogers.